Hello, welcome everybody. We are opening right now this new talk of ARCO Lisboa online edition 2020. As you all know, this project we created this year was a way of not forgetting that we were working in ARCO Lisboa in the project of a fair that we all love so much, that the galleries invest so much on, and I mean effort and ideas, and the artists and the curators, everybody. And so, as you know, we couldn't make it happen this year, like physically. So we decided to go in this special digital version. This year we had already planned something that was also very important for us in the like physical program, and was on the Tuesday before the fair. We were planning a visit to Porto. We wanted to be there. We wanted to see the institutions. We had planned different things with curators, with collectors, to spend one day all together there, and that couldn't happen. So we thought that it was very important also to give voice and to have presence of a group of curators and professionals from Porto. So here they are. We invited them to be part of this talk, and we want to thank them, their generosity, for being present here today with us. I'm just very briefly going to introduce them, and you can see the names, so it's very easy. I'm going to introduce them, and then I will let João to direct this talk. So we have here with us Inês Moreira. Inês, she is a researcher, curator, and postdoctoral fellow at Nova Lisboa, active in different platforms of cultural organizations as the European Forum for Advanced Practices. In the past, she studied architecture in Barcelona and worked with Enric Miralles, amongst other architects. Guilherme Blanc. Guilherme, he is the director for contemporary art and film at the city of Porto. Barbara Piwowarska. Sorry, Barbara, if I didn't pronounce properly. I hope it was okay. Thank you. And she's the curator and art historian, and she's the artistic director of Casa and Roque at Porto. And João Ribas, he's the director today of our talk, and he is someone who is very close to ARCO Lisboa. He's collaborated with us many times, and we really appreciate also his work and his evolution. And now today he is executive director and vice president of cultural partnership at REDCAT Los Angeles. So we are really very honored to have you all here. And now I let you start. As you know, I will be there if you need me, but for everybody who is attending, you can just delete my black square by canceling the people without video. So thank you so much again. I let you start.
Muito obrigado, Maribel. Eu vou só dizer aqui algumas palavras, primeiro em português. Em primeiro lugar, dar as boas-vindas aos convidados. Quero agradecer a Maribel, a ARCO e a Ana Álvares por organizar esta conversa, e também a toda a gente que está a acompanhar deste novo formato, que de certa forma também reflete a realidade qual vamos estar a falar. E vamos ter vai ser uma conversa que pode ser bilíngue, mas vai ser maioritariamente em inglês, porque temos convidados. A Bárbara, que está a aprender português.
Obrigada.
Mas pronto, acho que por necessidade também podemos falar as duas línguas, e se houver, claro, perguntas, estejam à vontade de as formular em português. So, I just want to very briefly get us started by kind of outlining a little bit of the sort of my own personal thinking, but I think that dovetailed with what would be worth discussing today. So we're living in this very particular new reality, in the sense that we're very much in the present, but thinking also about the impact of everything that's happened in the last few months, the impact of that on the future, and the long-lasting changes that our current very complex realities will have on what we do. And that ranges from economic impact to precarity and workers' rights, to rethinking how we work, what we do, this kind of time of reassessment, and what we bring with us from this period, not only to address changes that were there, changes that have clearly, changes that needed to be made, changes that have come up, and also realities that that we are challenged with and have to engage. And again, those range from the economic impact to questions of diversity, and inclusion, as well as questions of precarity. And so I wanted to start by asking each of you, and maybe Inês, we can start with you, how you see the impact of these last 3 months going forward, and the challenges that, you know, as an independent curator, as well as someone who is working in the academic context and dealing with that reality very much on the ground, right? We're all in Porto, but yet we're all engaging in this conversation in a mediated way. Sort of how do you see those changes? How have they affected what you do? And what do you think going forward this kind of raises, or what does it engage for you?
So it's daring to be the first one to speak. Well, thank you for organizing us, to bringing us together. It's not that common that we have the opportunity to speak, even though we live in the same city. So this is quite a unique moment. But to start with, I would address the title of this meeting. It's on institutions. And I don't work exactly within an institution. I believe that what we have been doing is to set different modes of organization and different sorts of coalitions, alliances, eventually collaborations of different sorts among different institutions and non-institutional forms of work. So I would put forward this, how to say, maybe a collateral mode of work, not the main affiliations, because I could mention a few, like Nova, FBAUP, the Fine Arts School, even ESAP, the private school, or this European Forum I work with. But maybe I would stress that what we have been doing is trying to find different ways of organization, which don't depend on institution making, nor on norms or on regulations, but more on instituting different modes of creation. This is a different way of working than the one you have when inside a museum or inside a contemporary art center or inside a very strong kind of organization. But these kind of seepage and passages and the inventiveness that is at the same time taking the risks of thinking outside of those borders, I think it allows us to very immediately not adapt, but to understand how our way of work resonates with the pandemic world, which is quite surprising. So the transformation, and I'm speaking as an independent personally from my perspective, the transformation is not that deep. I mean, if we don't think of the big economic conditions of culture, because personally I work as a scientist, so personally I'm more into the fields of knowledge production and science than exactly in the field of culture, which is the most affected. We've seen that the withdrawal of tourism has dismantled the cultural system, because artists are not working in Airbnbs and snacks and in hotels and so on. So we've seen the fragility of culture and its economy, but from my position, it's a bit different. So I don't know where to sit in this conversation, but I rather play the alterity. So maybe I'll play this position, which is the non-institutional for this conversation. I would play the constellation. I believe that's my role here.
Thank you for that. I think what one of the reasons why I think it's interesting, and I would urge you to engage that position, is because I think there's you know, Porto has a very unique context, and it's rewarding to me, having worked here now for 6 years, as I get ready to leave, to reflect a little bit and have this forum to talk about what happens in the city. And you raise some of those things. And I think that you're somebody who's in contact with a variety of different institutions and realities, and has been very responsive to those. And I think it's somebody who's very sensitive and engaged with those realities, and probably feels a lot of those, that reality up close, maybe more than people who maybe are in some privileged more privileged positions, such as I am, for example. And so
we have to define privilege.
Sure, I will
Okay,
speak for mine. I will speak
have
for
to-
mine to say that I think that, you know, there are realities which I try to be aware of and attentive to and find solutions to. And part of opening this conversation is to engage people who have those different perspectives and can speak from those formats. And so, and I'm particularly also interested in how you see kind of on the educational level and on the kind of on the ground grassroots level, if this situation has created interesting or, you know, there's a mobilization that's happened in Porto around what's been happening with support for culture and what's been happening in terms of programmatic opportunities and social solidarities. And I'm wondering what your relationship to that is and how you see that going forward, which I think is a positive step coming out of a very complex situation.
I understand where you're heading, but I'm not sure that I fit exactly that position, or that's not from where I see my position. Like, for instance, today we have been doing the final arrangements for a summer school in Malta, which was supposed to happen next week with Concordia University, the University of Malta, and with this European Forum with 36 countries. So I think that living in Porto is more like a, let's say, a geographical condition from where to operate. And then you have two different ways of connection. We live in a local scene, of course, and the scene is very wide. One of the impacts that I'm very afraid that will happen is that the immigrants will escape the country. So I'm very much afraid that this economical condition leads the Brazilian artists and students who came to live in Porto and give this kind of international sense to the city. This is one of the things that I'm afraid of an immediate impact. It's not exactly just about a local community, but this international community that has been growing, developing, and unfolding new discourses and even new aesthetics in their production. But so I think that Porto is more like a geographical condition. I will not say an accident. It's a platform from where to operate. And the big bear for this kind of work, it's more how to connect internationally, which was anyway happening through informatics. It was happening through digital media, sometimes with physical movement and presence, of course, with the preoccupations of a local scene. But as I say, I don't represent them, I'm not representing them. I don't represent the different layers, because what's interesting is to see how these models of operating outside institutions, like diverging resources, having access to different knowledges, gatekeeping and having access. So somehow escaping the rules and the gates that have been created in this system, which is highly formal, and somehow in the last years it became a bit excessive. Somehow there was this party-like sense going around with this economic boom going on. So if the economic boom regresses, if there's not so much abundance, how to keep the two platforms active in the same conditions? I think that is the most daring question. So more than speaking about the specific reality of workers in culture, which we can speak about it, and I mean, there's different documents being signed around the world about this, I would focus on this condition in between the local and the international, in between institutions, in between organizations, and how to keep things active. Because I'm not embodying other condition than mine at this moment for this conversation.
Right. Well, thank you very much. One of the things that I was struck by in the last couple of weeks was the writer Arundhati Roy wrote an article with the headline "The Pandemic is a Portal," which I found really fascinating because it again, the city in which we are geographically based, in which we work, is unique. It's got an interesting and historically interesting art school. It's got lots of independent spaces. It's got a vibrant artistic community, a major international museum with Schaafs and the Philippe Verne, the current director, was actually part of the ARCO talks last week. And of course, it also has a very active municipal gallery. And so, Guilherme, I wanted to ask you, actually, it's a special day today because the gallery is reopened as of today with the program, the exhibitions that were on as we entered into quarantine. And so I'm curious to sort of, what has it meant for you to kind of put that part on hold as you've been actively taking measures also to do things to mitigate the impact and responding to it, how it shaped your response? Has it changed what you do, what you will do, and how you go about it? Sort of, how do you see the reality affecting this institution, which I think takes on an ever larger and important role in the kind of artistic life of the city?
Well, those are a lot of questions. I'll try to address them all. First of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation to ARCO for organizing this. It's great to be back now in this long distance and digitally. It was a very rather intense process and period of work for us as well. To us, a warning with no previous warning. So we ultimately had to pass through this process and engage with a new way of grasping our work, and we had to, because of that, to revisit our management strategy, the way we were thinking, the way we were conceiving our project, starting with obviously the way we had planned in terms of programming our work. We had to develop an intense work of reprogramming of practically 2 years. Now speaking of Galeria Municipal, one of the challenges we faced was obviously in first instance to how to keep the integrity of the project we had. At the same time, keeping the many commitments, artistic commitments we had with multiple people, from artists to curators, producers, all sorts of technicians, those who come out of this period and process in a tremendous state of precarity and fragility and insecurity. So how to keep our commitments. This was very complex because in the first moment, we barely had any legal frame to operate and protect people and stick to our commitments. This was very complex in the beginning. And of course, trying to imagine new ways and systems of relation and new ways of support with, obviously, with coherence to our mission, to our inner mission. We had to, over the past 3 months, we had to fight to keep intact our budget in a context when there was a huge financial loss for the municipality, and happily we could count with the comprehension and I would say almost the protection of the mayor of Porto in this process. And amongst all this, we were fighting every day with a huge anxiety, which was basically trying to solve a very complex equation. So in a scenario of massive financial loss for everyone, but also for a city. And the fact that we were not a legislating entity, so we couldn't fix some of the problems. We were completely dependent on the state. So we were also waiting and lobbying at the same time to fix what seemed to be very basic issues, but didn't have a frame to exemplify how to pay something that we had to cancel. how to pay an artist whose exhibition was being rescheduled for next year. Very simple things, but without a previous frame, which would allow us to operate and solve. This was very complicated, very complex to manage. And also the fact that our purpose is to fund cultural production, but what we have now, it's not a problem of cultural production. It's a problem of social existence. It's a problem of survivance. So within this, what could we do to amplify our ways of support and continuing our mission the way it is, and the economies behind our mission, the economy behind an exhibition, which we believe that shouldn't be cancelled, if this makes sense to you in abstract. I will start with this complexities and anxieties.
Maybe just as a quick follow-up, you know, now we're in a scenario where we're trying to return to some thing. I mean, I hesitate to call it either the new normal, new abnormal, or business as usual, because I'm hoping that we don't return to business as usual. But we are in essence returning to opening exhibitions and looking at art and kind of engaging. Do you foresee there being a difference not only in the habits of spectatorship, and is that a challenge, or do you see a need also to reflect on what has happened, in the sense that not only is the visitor or people returning with some anxiety or not, but that what is being presented could take on a new relevance or new irrelevance, right? Like, in the sense, what has been happening in this interim period that should be or can be reflected beyond
that's an incredibly relevant question and pertinent question, because I think some of the things we had programmed probably will partly lose sense.
Although you have an exhibition on called Masks at the moment.
Yeah, we have. So this is something to manage as well. It was something we had to manage, obviously, but in many ways. But the fact is, yes, to answer your question, I think some things we had conceived and some things we had planned will have to be conceptually revisited, recontextualized within today's concerns. And I do think that process may happen organically. I don't think it will be imposed. I think curators and artists will feel that urge to adapt and to rethink again their processes. I think that will happen in a very natural and I think healthy way, possibly. In terms of visiting, I think it's too soon. I don't know yet, João. I think we will experience a new way of contacting and with cultural spaces and cultural production. But I'm honestly, I do not know yet. I think it's too soon. I think we will definitely experience a new way of visiting, of accessing. But I do think that it's too early. This is one of the most complex things I think behind the situation, which is the fact that everything happens so fast, and so there is this obscurity, you know. So we don't know what will come and how people will react and deal with this new way of experiencing culture. So I think we'll have to wait and see. Some things I do know, just to
Sure.
Last note, I do think that we will experience a shortage of visitors, that's for sure. So I think we will see a very limited number of people in the first moment. So I do think that the way we deal with our strategy of reaching and accessing people will have to change. And I think that needs to happen immediately. I think we need to completely reconfigure the way we were communicating with people, and it's also our duty to break this barrier that was erected over the past 3 months.
Thank you. And speaking of sort of being responsive, and in this ecology, Barbara, you opened a new institution, adding, I think, greatly to the city, and a fascinating project in many ways, by its own sort of construction, and you did so, not too. Certainly impacted by the last couple of months, because I think all the work you had done to kind of set this up, and it had a great first exhibition, which I enjoyed very much, this exhibition of Anajata. So I'm curious if sort of adding to this conversation with this institution and going into this complex situation, how do you see it changing? How do you see it reflecting what you're doing at Casa São Roque, which again is probably one of the newest institutions in the city? You yourself coming here to work in this context from overseas, in New York, among other places. So I'm just curious kind of how that has impacted you, and how do you think it's impacted this new player in this scene, and how do you see what the Casa São Roque can do or will do in relationship to this, and how it's being impacted?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So maybe just to summarize quickly, I think like maybe I represent institution that is really not formatted yet, and maybe it will never be that kind of formatted institution, which is a great privilege for me. It's first time in my life that I don't work in formatted established institution, which gives more freedom, or it's a new context. So I wanted to comment on Inês and Guilherme, that maybe I represent like a mirroring reversed situation here to both of you in different meaning. I used to work as independent curator for majority of my life, and I decided to take this job in Porto because of many reasons, but yeah, that's to Inês and to Guilherme. I wanted to make comment that I would never ever in my life guess I will work in such experimental structure. So what I can say about is that actually this COVID situation, of course, it affected us in a radical way, because the institution that even contains in its name Casa, the house, which is like, this is like our identity. We are someone's former living space that is being gradually transformed into a new art center in Porto. Of course, it affected us in a radical way that something that was just opened had to close for 3 months. But in my case, this situation gives more sense. Actually, unexpectedly, the program of the exhibitions for upcoming year, or maybe it will have to be spread in 2 years, yeah, because everything had to be postponed, and also the fundings and the financial sources. So we will have to operate in a slower way, but it gave new context to each of the show. Even Anajota exhibition, the inaugurational exhibition, if I look at it back, it's much stronger for me now, because you know, we were trying to speak about the house, about this bourgeois legacy of Porto, which is very, very strong. So Anajota, she created a total installation consisting of her objects that in a way they subverted the building as such, and this situation she was invited to participate in. So for me, it's a great context to see her show being imprisoned. Now her show is trapped and imprisoned for more months. It will have to last until beginning of October, because the next exhibition we can open in October, not earlier. But the next show was also like trying to reference the notion of the house, and was trying to make a comment to Porto as the city in general, and this legacy coming back, of course, to the 18th century through 19th and beginning of 20th century, which is called footnote 14, Angel of History. It is like in the frame of series of projects of footnotes that are projects making comments to situations. You know, and I could never expect, it is a project I run since years, and I do it when I'm invited to do it, very rare, through years. And this time I decided I want to do it here, of course, because it's my city, my institution now. And I would never guess that how strongly it will resonate with the context of COVID, isolation and crisis. So, because it's devoted to Walter Benjamin, and of course the figure of angel history, you know, it's it comes from this thesis on the notion of history, where it appears just right after the passus he's speaking about the state of emergency and about the progress. So this show, of course, would have to be redefined, but it gives us a wonderful like new chapter, and the footnote appears here as a perfect tool for the crisis time, because I invented it in the moment of crisis in Warsaw, when institution where I work at CCA in Ujazdowski Castle in Warsaw started to collapse. You know, it was like, I don't know, I think 10 years ago. So now it's a very complicated project involving many international collaborations, but also local collaboration with Susanna Camagno from Sismographo Collective, expert in Benjamin, with whom we developed during this COVID time very interesting dialogue, and we will prepare also conference and publication together. And then the next project, and maybe I will finish on this, the next project was supposed to be called The House and the Studio. It was supposed to speak about the notion of the place where art is produced and where life is lived, or this distinction between the artist's house and the artist's studio, or lack of this distinction. And now, you know, we have to redefine this project. It was supposed to be collaboration with CUNY University in New York and Elena Claire Feldman. We are supposed to curate this show together, and we could not predict the notion of the house and the studio. Nowadays, it needs really to be put in question. So we have another fascinating topic to develop in post-pandemic times.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm just going to circle back, and I'm starting to see some questions, so I want to make sure I also, carve out a little time to respond. And please feel free to send us questions, as we have the chat open, so we're happy to be reactive and respond. I guess I'm also curious, there have been a variety of responses, as well as a series of issues that were raised during this period, which I think are not new, but maybe are thrown into relief by this pandemic, by the reality in which we live, which is now sort of greater than the pandemic itself. And I'm just curious of what you think, what has been successful in terms of measures and responses, what do we need to think about, and what hasn't worked, what can we do on the local level, what should be done on other levels. And you can, I don't mean the question to be broad. I'm just curious if there are specific things you think were particularly effective and things that were not. And in particular, also, it's refocused things like precarity, because within the variety of measures, for example, and I think relevant to the ARCO conversation, many of those measures do not support the commercial art market world, for example, which is also, I think, impacted to a great extent. So what do you think has been successful? What do you think has not been successful? And in particular, within the relationship of your institutions or how you work to, say, commercial galleries, or within sort of cultural workers, who have been very active. And I think it's been inspiring, but also I think personally it's been, I feel a great sense of responsibility there in that regard. How do you see this moving forward, and what do you think has been successful, and what can we do better, or what should we focus on?
May I? There's something?
Yes, of course.
Yeah?
Please.
So if we take the word that you mentioned previously, which shocked me tremendously, the notion of privilege, let's say that the commercial market for visual arts, it's a market for privilege. And facing such difficulties in everyday life for the whole society, we were shocked that, for instance, Novo Banco, this bank in Portugal, just got some more millions to cover this financial crisis whole. So I would situate both kind of markets in the same level. And Novo Banco has a private collection as well. So let's say that the private commerce of art is in level with the same kind of ecology of high finance, speculation around the objects, and the privilege that you mentioned is around that field. On the other hand, we were worried about the economy of culture workers for a long time, and tourism was allowing us to somehow cover the situation. Because for us who work institutionally in different platforms, I mean, I work with science, but it's a cultural field of knowledge production. We don't face those kinds of difficulties, and especially a kind of shame, because there's a notion of shame that comes with this kind of poverty that artists live, and they were living through tourism, not openly declaring this absence of resources. And now, after the closure and the pandemics, what withdrew was not culture, it was tourism mostly, and then culture. So it's like a lose-lose. It's like a 2-0 against the artists and the cultural workers. And so I know I'm being very extremist in both extremes, but these are the most radical positions in this ecology of culture. And then it's us, no? We can play different roles depending if it's now, in 5 years, 2 years ago, roles keep shifting, but the system is somehow benefiting a certain fringe and is getting aware of the other fringe at the moment. So I want to underline these aspects.
Thank you very much, Inês. Thank you. That was a really sort of sharp and well-articulated answer. Thank you. Guilherme, I just want to note that there is you have a kind of, I want to give you the option of an alternative question, because you have 2 questions here that are kind of directed to you. So you can ignore my question. And one of the things that, there's sort of 2 things that I think they're related. One is, do you see the online platform as a platform that could be useful in this period, Nolan initiatives to help also as a platform, as an extension? Is something that I'm very much thinking about and very engaging personally. And sort of related to that, could that be a way to also expand to a certain extent questions of access? So like, I'll put it in the form that it's been expressed. How to invite those who have been left out or will neither have the energy or the opportunity to sort of re-engage? And could the online format be an interesting way to do that? And do you see that as part of developing that as a kind of future initiative or as part of your program?
Well, I can address that, but beforehand, perhaps I would very much like to maybe say something about your previous question,
Yes,
if you
of
allow
course.
me, João. I think I'll say it very, very briefly. I think one of the gains of this process, I think, was in fact that he was pretty much, it brought to surface, I think, issues and problems which the sector was experiencing, artists, independent artists and agents and cultural workers were experiencing for years. And I think this moment brought to surface those problems in a very vivid, in a very violent way. So I think this was a success, using your term. What was a success? I think amongst all this, I think it made us all, and what I mean by us is, I think Portuguese society came across this problem, and the reason why was because there was a big way of solidarity, and I think I think maybe for the first time in many years, the sector joined forces to shout and to say, there is a big problem here. We are wrecked. You know, there are issues that are not being addressed in terms of our status, in terms of the way we operate, in terms of our economy, in terms of the informality or formality of the way we do work and operate. And so I think now we are all going to have to face this, and something's has to be fixed. And I think there is a chance, there's a window here of opportunity, and the credit goes to the sector, which is forcing a solution, which is brilliant. I do think. So there is this movement. I hope it leads somewhere. It needs to lead somewhere. Okay. So this is an answer to your question very briefly. In terms of the online experience, what can I say? I do think I'm a bit skeptical, I have to say, about these online experiences. This is just my personal view on the subject. I do think that we may be forced to experience and to go through a redefinition of the online production. I'm fully against converting the existing way of experiencing culture into an online format. I think that's a huge mistake, and I'm against it. I'll put it that way. So I do think that we may be forced somehow. We're not sure yet. Perhaps that won't have to happen. Actually, it's funny because I was discussing with Inês some days ago this topic for another reason. We were discussing this about the pros and cons of this digital experience, and I don't know, but I don't know what happened to you. But again, on my side, what can I say? We all went to, not all, but a lot of people went to do online work during the day for hours and hours. Those who could afford that this is a privilege, I do think. This was a real privilege. So those who are privileged went through an online working experience, as I was. And after hours and hours of meetings and back and forth, back to back, I think it's very tiring at the end of the day to engage with online experiences. So I'm very skeptical about this, and I don't think that the way we were producing and the artistic output, I don't think it is prepared, adapted, adjusted to that type of conversion.
May I address something?
Yeah, sure. Inês, interrupt me.
It's related to what you're saying, because it has to do with going bigger or going smaller, or what kind of audience you expect. Because if you don't split what's culture, like what's the audience, what's the production, what's the event, what's the relationality, and the learning that you get from the event, then the notion of scale is not that relevant. If we erase the entertainment aspects and certain conviviality that some events have, like big openings, and you focus on those moments of intensive knowledge production and sharing and ways of mediating and facilitating content, then maybe the digital can be a substitute or can be a different format, but of course not for this much wider audience. When you have to count the numbers, then it's impossible to substitute because you don't have the numbers and you don't have that sense of multitude that some events have. And
Yes.
it would be interesting to focus on that, on plans for going smaller as well.
Yeah.
Can I just,
let me
I just want to make sure that Barbara has a chance to jump in here and reply. I apologize.
I agree with Guilherme totally. So I don't have anything original to add to this. I don't believe in this digital transformation. From my side, like I can speak about the very small institution that is it's all about the site-specific experience. Like you cannot communicate anything, digitalized or online, or maybe it makes sense in bigger corporations, art institutions that are corporations that also they developed through years big resources, internet resources, and there are some cases that I really appreciated the way how they contributed to this pandemic times. For instance, Centre Pompidou, they had very good series of screenings with very carefully chosen films. We could find some good examples, but they were nothing so special. Like they were just the way to show parts of the collection in a different way, right? So I don't believe institutions could achieve something like by turning to digitalization or that kind of communication. I am very analog person, so maybe and representing old school. So in our case, I don't see a reason to try to send newsletters or try to digitalize this experience that is really unique in Casa São Roque. And in Parque São Roque, you cannot transfer it to any internet experience. So so I think this pandemic is over. That's also like my hope that maybe we will not have to think more about this, how to transfer the format of exhibitions or how to present artworks, that maybe it is really coming back to the so-called normality, whatever it means. But I hope like we just opened, institutions just reopened, and so maybe maybe this putting things on hold for 3 months and putting everything in question was very good for everybody, and but I hope it's over. Yeah.
Just before we close out, I don't know if anyone wants to respond, or are there any last kind of thoughts, just to give us a moment, just to return to anything we've been discussing.
If Guilherme's identified success, quoting João, taking his words, is to identify the symptoms of a system that is highly unequal and cannot produce in a deeper way because artists are focused on living instead of producing, then I don't think we can go back to normal. Many of us work in different ways, sometimes institutionally and bearing big events on our backs and dealing with Excel sheets and so on. but other times trying to understand how people organize themselves, because this kind of organization, it's a knowledge per se. And the cultural ecosystem in a very is very rich in terms of diversity of practices, modes of organization, sharing of resources. And I wouldn't say that in the end, it's just about setting up curated exhibitions. It's much more about creating the means of production and its macro and micro economies and teams and setting the conditions than just this international circulation of objects. So I would focus much more on the hidden structures, the backstage, the scaffolding, the modes of organization, learning from these more insidious ways of operating, so to rethink institutions, than just getting back to normal, because normal wasn't working anyway, it seems. That's why these voices had to be raised, because people were not, there was this kind of shame about the public representation of artists that didn't allow them to speak. And I think we shouldn't forget that after reopening. So I'm sorry, Barbara, but I had to say this.
Guilherme, I don't know if you want to, or anybody else wants to add anything before we close out.
Well, I do. Well, I do agree with Inês. Well, I think a lot of things will be triggered now over the next, I think, weeks probably. I think things are reopening. I think we will understand if we're going back or forth. I think there is, as I said, I think there is a window of opportunity here. And I think some of the things which we were claiming, we were using the words such as solidarity, sustainability, ecology, and we were forced to face them in a different position now, and everyone was. So I think there is this opportunity here of, taking action, properly, and some things that were so dear to us, sometimes, even the way we were conceiving our project, trying to plug in the local with international, and all these networks we're building, and the way we were living these networks, traveling a lot, all these things. What does it mean to be to have implement solidarity within our work? I think it's now time to prove, and to take action, if this makes sense. I think this is a time when we are going to either go back to normality or implement a new normality. And I think this is a crucial moment in the way we of what we want for us, for this sector. What has real meaning to us as agents, and some things will be forced to face, some other things probably we won't be forced, and we'll have the option. I think we'll have an option.
If we would be cynicists, we could think that this was a laboratory to test some ideas and concepts that were circulating international for long, but this is a very cynical perspective, to have to go through a pandemic to test the limits of our capitalist system. So I would reverse the scale and think the other way around, which is which other creative ideas, which other modes of operation, which other trials and errors and modes of organization are there than this one that we knew before, and what can we learn from it? Because these big debates about decolonization and post-colonial studies are very wide and can be played, for instance, when we think what will happen to all these foreigners who were among us. Are they allowed to leave us, to live with us? Will they leave us? Or we can go in a more academic way and think, for instance, of the epistemologists from the South, what can we as well not only learn but teach, because this kind of desenrasque, this disentangled way of living that the southern people have can be useful for northern countries these days. So on the one hand, we can share our own knowledges with other people and understand who's around and if they're allowed to stay or not. So I would say we will not be playing conceptually, but we will be playing with actions in the next weeks and months and maybe the next year. Our gestures and decisions will be deciding the future. So it's not just playing with concepts, but maybe playing them out. I think this is the big change from symptom to reality, I would say. And this is a positive note, okay?
Yeah.
Positive one.
We all live very happy.
Don't.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I only wanted to add from my side one more sentence I forgot to say, that I do believe in these times I rediscovered the real interinstitutional collaborations, and I do believe this is maybe the direction I would like to work in, and also I work in very particular neighborhood and in Campania and part of Porto. So also I think we already established interesting collaborations before, and now they have different meaning, these collaborations. So so this is maybe the direction of such local institution as is Casa São Roque, which is mostly dedicated to local people, not to tourism, not yet. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for your insight, and thank you for agreeing to join us. It's great to see everyone, and I'll take Inês's notes, which I think was extremely positive, to say that one of the things I look forward to is seeing you all in person, even before I leave Porto, which I have to say I am sad to do. So Maribel is back with us. Thank you to you.
No, I just wanted to thank you, and I wanted to say how interesting the talk was. There were so many strings to pull for new panels, so many interesting point of view, and so many things. I was nodding, like here on my and sometimes I was making faces, but really, really, really interesting. And maybe physically, maybe digitally, but I hope we can have you back again and discuss all these very interesting things. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone who joined us and everyone who sent questions. Thank you very much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.